I don't generally do this sort of video, but a thought came to my head last night and I just wanted to say thank you. It has been 20 years. Think about that for a moment. 20 years, that's 2 decades since I first got a separate domain for my Starfleet X-Bomber homepage. In that time, I have had a son, I have become a cyborg, I've lost my dad. A lot has happened. You know, this is life. But the one constant through that time for me has been the fact that back when in my mid-20s, I decided that I would create a website. And the really interesting thing about it for me is that it started out as a single page about a show that I remembered when I was very little that really stuck in my head. And I think we all have that show that, you know, we can really relate to, that somehow in some curious way kind of defined our childhood. I don't know why that is. There must be some quirk to that. Maybe there was just a developmental phase our brains were going through at the time and it just sticks with us. I don't know. For me, that was Starfleet. And back in the day, before SFXB was a site, I had my own web pages up on Demon as a service provider, who of course now left us. But on those pages, I had a single page that just set out my recollections of the series, and I hadn't done a lot of research at that point. And that led to people emailing me saying, yeah, I remember this too, you know, have you got any videos, you know, when they're planning to re-release it, all of that sort of stuff. And that must have been sort of late 1990s, very late 1990s in fact. So off the back of that, I expanded the number of pages on Starfleet on my Demon account. I put a forum together, which was, you know, they were quite new at the time. There was no Twitter. I don't think YouTube was even a thing when I was first starting out. And from there, I'm not even sure if I can actually claim that the site having its own domain name was my idea. I'm not entirely sure if it was or if someone suggested it to me on the forum. But because I was working in tech, loosely at least, I knew enough to be able to get a domain name and set up hosting. And as I say, this just came to my head literally last night, and I checked, and sfxb.co.uk was registered as a domain in May 2001, and it is now May 2021 at the time of recording. So I've no idea why I thought about it. I've literally no idea. It was one of those little quirks, something up here just fired and thought you should go and check and see how long your site's been running for. I think my brain's doing a lot of organising at the moment because I've just finished moving house and I'm kind of out of that phase and looking to the future a bit more. And I guess with me that also includes looking back at the past. As I say, my dad passed away about this time last year, and that's still quite raw. So I suppose I am sort of looking back a bit. But you know, the site has always been that sort of constant for me, and I haven't been very active with it of late at all. But there's a reason for that, and I'll come to that. So I want to talk a little bit about the community, because I don't think there are that many online presences that have been going for 20 years. I think things sort of come and go, and there's Facebook now, so people use that instead of, you know, doing sort of dedicated websites so much anymore, perhaps. I think that's a fair comment. And I never thought it would take off. That wasn't really part of the plan when I originally wrote the page. I've always been interested in doing websites from an intellectual challenge point of view. Because when I started out, there were no tools to do it. So all of my websites have always been hand-coded. So I've just had to come up with methods to sort of deal with that myself because of the time when I was doing it. So when I started out, my ability to actually put web pages up was quite unusual. So what I found was that when I first put up the site, or the page anyway, people started sending me things by email and saying, would you like to use this on the site? Because obviously what had happened was that purely but through accident, I had become the sort of single presence at that particular time of Starfleet related stuff on the internet. So, I inadvertently became a webmaster. And at that point in time, that actually meant something, because there weren't that many websites around being run by amateurs basically. So I got sent videos in the post, videotapes. I got sent images. I got scans of magazine articles, and as time went on, I started looking around myself to get more material for the site as well. So obviously I was adding to it at the same time. I discovered that the UK tapes that I knew of, that I remembered from my childhood, were still available through eBay, of course. So I got hold of a few of those. I bought a Canopus ADVC, I want to call it, a little black box, about yay big. It's still in my garage, and that allowed me to convert an analog NTSC VHS tapes into digital files, and so through that I was able to gain source material that I could then take screenshots from, and so I was able to do an episode guide on the site that included screenshots from the videos, and it just snowballed from there. And of course, then the really interesting stuff started happening, because then other people came along and started doing their own sites as that became easier for people to do. So I haven't researched the timelines, but I would say in the sort of the mid 2000s, I started to see more people getting their own domain names as a common thing. And what was really fascinating was that everyone had a slightly different take on it. My site was very focused on the show as it was broadcasted in the UK. So I was interested in the episode, the ships, the characters, and that was, broadly speaking, as far as my site went, subject to whatever else anyone else sent me in to put up on it. And other people went a different way. Other people expanded the storyline in different directions. Other people were more artistic than me, and so they looked at that side of it. Crash, who I will come to, developed a game and is still developing a game based on the series and the ships in the series and his love for the series, which is lovely. And it was just fascinating to see how people took it in different directions. And we were quite respectful of each other as well. We didn't tend to tread on each other's toes. We all sort of cross-linked. We all linked to each other's sites, and it was very community-driven. I'm not saying there were no negatives, because sometimes there were negatives, and they were sorted out. And in that way, I suppose the development of our community is just a microcosm of every other community that's sprung up since and before on the internet. People fall out, people get back together again, people move on. So in 2010, I was really poorly. I died, technically speaking. That's why I now have a defibrillator implanted in my chest. And that obviously, as you might expect, was a bit of a turning point. And at that point in time, the site was effectively frozen. And I still tinker with it. I still have a tradition of putting a Santa hat on Di-X when it's the right time of year to do that. And sometimes I even remember to take it off in good time. But I still do that. I still tinker on the forums. It's still a site that I use if I need a website to do stuff on, because I have other interests. I do Lego ideas projects now, which you'll see on this YouTube channel. I meant to check actually before I started filming this video, just when I first started putting Starfleet clips up on YouTube, because some of my videos have got a lot of views. And I would love to say it's because they're mega popular. It isn't. It's because they're ancient. It's because they've been on there for probably best part of 15 years plus, maybe. And of course, you naturally accumulate a lot of views over a long period of time. So that's just, that's what it is. But just before I was poorly, something very interesting was going on, and this for me, I think, is probably the high point of what I was hoping would happen off the back of SFXB really sort of taking off. And that was that we'd sort of figured out between us all who the holders of the rights to the series probably were. We knew that it had come from Japan originally, but obviously there'd been a really good English sub of it, in effect, which is English dub of it, sorry, right term, which obviously we'd all watched growing up in the early 80s, and we figured that somebody somewhere must still have the tapes, because these things never seem to get binned off. There's, fundamentally they are a potential source of revenue for these companies, and they're probably not going to get binned. And it was apparent that Japan had laser discs created, so we knew there had to be somebody somewhere doing things with the source material, and that it had been been digitized at that sort of early point in time. So the upshot of all this was that I got inquiries from time to time from people who sounded pretty legitimate, saying, "Do you know who owns the rights? We're interested in doing something with the source material." And I was able to say to them, "I think Inoki Films own it. Maybe you could go and contact them." And this culminated in a company called Fabulous Films here in the UK getting and upgrading, in effect, the source material for a commercial release. So just before I was poorly, I was gifted this by the company, and this was the first digital official release of the show in the UK since the 80s, when the VHS compilation tapes were available, and that was all that we ever had up until that point. The only exception was the NTSC tapes from America, which were sort of okay. They captured all 24 episodes of the series, so they were fine. But the artwork on the cases and stuff was, they weren't screenshots from the series or anything like that. And the episodes were 3 to a tape, so at least we had something. And until we had this DVD set, that was all we had. And they did this really well. I mean, the nice thing about this is that it's got a lot of detail. It's got an interview by Golden Guy, the show's creator, is on it as well. And if the camera will pick that up, you'll see that you may not be able to focus on that, but the website, my website, is referenced just there. So SFXB is immortalised on the back cover of the Starfleet DVD, and that for me was really lovely. I think I mentioned on the DVDs as well, I am going to be watching these soon, and I think what I would like to do is do some commentaries on them myself. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get round to that, so I don't want to sort of set expectations, because I just don't know, but I am hoping to do that. I also got this. This was rather lovely, because they didn't have to do this at all. But if you can see that is a classic shot that was used to promote the series, and it's been signed by a lot of the people who were involved in it creatively. So you can see Go Nagai, Louis Ellman, who did the English dub. Peter Marinka's signed it. He played the character Dr. Ben. Various other signatures in there. So that was a really nice thing for them to do. They didn't have to do that, but I did speak to them. We had conversations, and I gave them background material that I knew of, so that they could actually put more features onto the disc than might otherwise have been the case. And that for me had always been a goal. I think when I realised that it was other people remembered the series, which again was something I didn't know, and I mean because the internet didn't exist up until the late 90s, from my point of view, from a sort of a domestic point of view, if you like. I just didn't know how popular the series was, and I think even now there are, I've seen there's still a Facebook group that deals with it that seems to be reasonably active. But for me, I think the DVD coming out really sort of capped it all off, and it made it all worth it, because I thought now at least other people like my son could see the series again in a digital format, and it will live on. And that was kind of what I was hoping for, because if you were watching this, you probably know the show, so I don't really need to tell you this, but for a kids show, it really wasn't one, if that makes sense. So it wasn't, the writers didn't treat it like a kids show. It wasn't trying to sell anything. There were no toys to speak of, especially not in this country. So they weren't trying to sell merchandise. That was the thing. It was an ongoing story over 24 episodes, which for a kids show was unheard of. I think it's fair to say at the time. I think you got serializations of books, sure, yeah, but this was original, and it was a conversion of a Japanese show that borrowed from Jerry Anderson's shows, although it used rod puppets, not string puppets. Combined that with Star Wars and what we would now view as Power Rangers. I think it would be termed a tokusatsu show, because it's a mix of mecha, who are guys in suits, but also the puppets. And I don't think anyone had ever really heard, anyone can still really point to another Japanese show that used puppets of that style and just took this approach to the series, or any series. So it is quite unique, and I think the fact that it used puppets in a science fiction setting with a story is what made it stick in my head, because and I think it killed people. Characters were lost. I can't think of another kids show that was doing that. When we got Battle of the Planets, we got a massively watered down version of Battle of the Planets. The Gatchaman series in Japan would have been killing people off left, right and centre in fairly nasty ways. We didn't get that. So somehow, under the radar, as science fiction shows often manage, they managed to put out a show that was remarkably mature for its time period. And so if as a child you had quite a mature head on your shoulders, as I think I probably did at that point in time, this was something that appealed to you, and it stuck with you because there was nothing else like it at the time for you to latch onto. I mean, I remember quite clearly sitting in a classroom when I'd finished my work before other people, writing what would now be termed fan fiction when I was like 8 years old. I mean, that's how much it got in my head. So, to see my website get put on the back of a DVD box about the series was lovely, because you do put a lot of time into these things, and it's one thing I want to come back round to now, because there were times, I think, as is often the way when you are taking responsibility for something, that it can become all-consuming. And I think that finding balance is important. I recently started watching reaction videos on YouTube, and I recognise in some of the problems that these creators have exactly the sort of same thing that I saw when I was taking responsibility for the website. You take on this responsibility voluntarily. No one is paying you. No one is requiring you to do it. You're choosing to do it. And if you make that sort of commitment and you're serious about it, I suppose if you care, then you put time into it. And that's what I did. I felt if I was going to do it, I should make a good hash of it, basically. And I enjoyed it because it gave my brain something to do, because designing a website at that point in time, as I mentioned earlier, was not straightforward. I had to think about how things were going to interlink. I had to think how people were going to navigate the site. I had to think how to make it work in different resolutions. You know, all of this stuff. Now, the tools are there to do that automatically, but me being quite old school, I just kept on plugging away. Even when the tools became available, I've never transferred the site onto a database-driven tool, partly because it's effectively frozen now. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that if you are doing something like this yourself, you need to recognise when it's too much. You need to recognise when you need to step back and away from it. And I think that I was pretty much ready for that when the DVD came out. I think I was edging towards that point anyway, because my life had moved on. My son was quite little when that sort of thing was happening, and obviously I had then had other responsibilities that meant that the site had to take something of a back seat. But I was lucky because I managed to get it to that point where I could wrap it up. And then when I was poorly, of course, I didn't have any choice but to wrap it up, really. That was the only sensible thing at that point in time, whilst I reassessed, you know, how things were going to be from that point. So, you know, I still was trying to respond to people. There aren't many people who come to me direct these days, and the forum on the site is very active. Well, I say very active. It's active enough that you probably will get a response if you go on there. And the forum itself is pretty ancient these days, and I want to come on to that because one thing that I've been really grateful for, and I want to say thank you for, in quasi person at least, is thank you to Crash, he knows who he is, for very, very kindly taking over the forum. So basically what happened was that I was using a very, very old piece of software called Icon Board to run the forum, and Icon Board wasn't really being supported anymore. It wasn't being upgraded. It ran off CGI bin, which is, you know, deeply old school, and the forum was breaking. It was getting a lot of spam, and it couldn't really carry on as it was. I was doing what I could with it, but I was reaching the edge of my technical abilities with it. And Crash had come along, and he was developing his X-Bomber game, and he was clearly very much better with the modern website tools than I was. So he had the image galleries. He was using, you know, Java and God knows what else to make a really good-looking game and a good-looking site. And I could tell that he had that sort of enthusiasm and energy for it that I had back in the day when I was doing it, which was lovely to see. And he basically offered to fix the site, and he transferred it from Icon Board over to I can't remember if it's PHP or whatever, but anyway, it became, you know, far better hosted. So now when you go to the forum, you go to effectively Crash's site, but it still looks like my site to a certain extent, but it's my forum as was, and it brought in all the existing content which I was really keen on, and the forum still goes on to this day, but managed by him. And it's not something I would have had the scope for in my life. And I wouldn't have had the technical ability for it either, because, you know, at my age now, I am getting long in the tooth, and you know, even doing this right now, this is the first time I've done a sort of an unscripted, straight to camera waffle like this, just because I can. At some point, I might get a green screen, and I might do some more reaction videos of my own, but I think, you know, I'm really happy that Crash has, in a sense, sort of taken on the torch of keeping the series going. He's been posting to Facebook about it, and I guess the question now is, you know, what happens next? I mean, I have no plans to take the site down. I don't need to. There's no point. It's my domain that I use for my day-to-day stuff as well these days, so it'll stay there for the foreseeable and we'll see how long it is before web browsers make it break. The only thing it's not great at is mobile, but then mobile wasn't a thing when I was designing it. So you'll just have to zoom in if you want to read it on mobile, I'm afraid. I don't know if I'll ever upgrade it. I don't know. I could. Do I need to? I'm not sure. I think it was of its time, as indeed the show was of its time, and you know, and I've got my other sort of 80s nostalgia stuff, and Starfleet Genesis is on there as well. My sort of continuation of the storyline, which I really enjoyed writing. It's probably the biggest, longest single story I've ever actually creatively written. And even then, you see the community came along and they did brilliant sort of audio conversion of elements of it, and they did better graphics for me for the storyboards and all this sort of good stuff. So that side of it for me has been really lovely to see other people enjoying the show, remembering the show, and that's all I ever really wanted, was that I wanted people to come onto the site and have a little internal smile on it. You know, I just wanted to. It just struck me that as the internet first appeared, it was this incredible tool whereby anybody at all could put something on the World Wide Web, people could see it, and you could have an impact potentially on them. And for me, that was nostalgia driven, because at that point, you know, other people hadn't really got to that nostalgia point. I mean, now you can find all sorts of old shows, and they're getting reinvented. So you got new Thundercats, you know, lots of these things are getting reinvented, because I know that people like me now have money and will probably buy the new toys for things like that. So I know nothing of any Starfleet revival. The forumers often wondered about who might play various characters if they did a live action version of it. But I've certainly never been asked by any sort of companies about it. So I don't know if that'll ever happen. You could easily do a CGI version of it these days, and that much is obvious. And there are people in the community who do CGI versions of the ships. I have done a Lego version of the ship. I came back to it and tried to make Explorer out of Lego, and it worked. It was you know, I was quite happy with it, and that actually got me into the Lego Ideas website, where I've now got a Space 1999 Eagle transporter up for support. So you know, it's had a lot of influence on how I've spent my leisure time over the last couple of decades, I guess, and possibly even before that. Yeah, so I just wanted to I wanted to mark the passing, I think, of 20 years of SFXB, and don't know where I'll be in the next 20. Might be pushing up the daisies. You just don't know, do you? But I just wanted to say thanks, really, for everyone who's supplied me with material over the years, everyone who's supported the sites. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add than that. So thank you, and keep an eye open for me probably doing quite amateurish looking reaction videos to the series at some point. I will get to it, but even this is Heath Robinson. I've got a webcam propped up on a cardboard box doing this, seriously. So there you go. I'll try and modernise. It may take a while. So with that, I will say thank you for watching. If you stuck through this, a little bit of self-indulgence on my part, and yeah, I'll see you out there. Stay safe. Bye.